Sehr verehrte Frau Bundeskanzlerin Dr. Merkel,
Madam Chancellor Dr. Merkel, it is a great honour and for me a personal delight to welcome you here to Davos once again. The last 2 years have been difficult years, but you, Dr. Merkel, have shown yourself to be bold, and in doing so you have proven that the issue that we are discussing at this meeting this year, new reality, also means new solutions, and that a crisis is the time not only to look back, but also to learn courageously from the crisis and look forward to the future. You have played a crucial role in Europe, and hopefully you will continue to do so. And we therefore welcome you warmly, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chancellor, Dr. Angela Merkel.
Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Schwab,
Professor Schwab, ladies and gentlemen, I very gladly accepted your invitation to come to Davos. Again, you know probably that I was here 2 years ago, and this year the theme is shared norms for the new realities. And I think that that essentially describes, in a nutshell, the new reality. And part of that is that we have learned that we are mutually dependent on each other, that there is a global network of players who are mutually dependent on each other. And whoever was doubting about this, I think just had to look at the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the aftermath of that to understand what was at stake, because who forgot about international interdependencies, about close integration, I think learned a lesson. And I think we've all decided that something like that should never happen again. So the past 2 years also have actually been very comforting, because politicians have demonstrated that they are capable of acting, that the world generally the international community has proved that it can actually work against the crisis, that it can tackle a crisis and master it. We have had the first meeting of the G20 in Washington. We have made quite considerable strides in regulations. So all of that shows that politicians the world over show themselves capable of action. So the positive lesson we've learned is that the worst thing we were able to prevent, namely the collapse of global economy as we know it. But the question is obviously, have we actually learned the lessons out of this crisis? Can we actually safely say that we will be able to prevent further crises from happening? Can we actually say we already have the necessary mechanisms and structures in place in order to ensure sustainable growth globally and for the duration? And I would say we have laid down the groundworks for this, but generally round, we have to say we are not there yet. What we've done is not yet sufficient, and now that we feel that the crisis is not something that dominates the headlines every day, we run the very real risk that also among members of the G20, there is perhaps less of an effort, less of a sense of urgency, and I think that is exactly the danger. We need to work against this, because we have an enormous job yet to be done. Those answers those questions are not yet answered. The main question is, can we actually prevent such a crisis from happening again? And can we ensure sustainable growth for the world as we know it? Only when we can give a safe answer to both of these questions have we actually completed the job. We need to do more. We need to regulate more. We have said every financial sector center, every financial player has to be made subordinate to supervision. So far, we have as yet not really truly coordinated international response to the question, what happens if a big, systemically important institution, a systemically important bank is collapsing? How can we avoid the taxpayer in the end footing the bill? So how can we prevent that from happening again? What's more important is what have we actually done in order to ensure lasting and sustainable growth? And the French G20 presidency this year is of prime importance in this context, because this exactly marks the transition from crisis mode to a phase where the world has to learn to work together better and more durably, not only in a crisis, but always. And the agenda that the French president outlined here, I think, has put the emphasis on exactly the right points. In South Korea already we agreed on a framework for growth, on a framework for sustainable, strong and equitable growth. We have to look at different aspects of this that play a very important role in this respect and which will enable us to forward this kind of policy. First, we have to concentrate on currency systems. I think we have to understand that exchange rates always need to reflect the fundamental data of an individual country. So they depend on the economic situation of a given country. Exchange rates have to, or the currency system has to be so robust that it can prevent financial excesses, that there will be no destabilizing capital flows. And we also have to see to it that imbalances all over the world are not allowed to play themselves out unrestrained. But imbalances will always happen when there is a difference and a great disparity in competitiveness. So that, again, will also be our task, try to put our competitiveness on a more equitable basis. Germany gladly accepted the challenge to discuss this together with Mexico in a working group to look at the future of a global currency system. I think we have to say that this is a task which we will not be able to solve overnight, but we Germans are glad to shoulder that responsibility. Secondly, the most worrying point after the crisis that we have seen is that there are certain indications for a more protectionist policy. Free trade is probably and arguably the simplest form to give a boost to global growth, and it's also the fairest and the most equitable form. So the conclusion of the Doha round is of utmost importance. After this speech here, I will have an opportunity to debate this with David Cameron, because the United Kingdom, together with Turkey and India, have initiated a policy where, together on the basis of a report drawn up by Mr. Sutherland and Professor Bagwati, that allows us to finally reach that goal. We are literally meters away from this finishing line. But if we are not reaching this finishing line, then, and I'm saying this loud and clear, decades will go by without this opportunity ever offering itself again. And the conclusion of the Doha round is the precondition for fair and equitable and robust growth all over the world. Each and everyone needs to do his or her bit, but in the end, I think it will be worth our while, and this goes for each and every country in the world. Third, we need to concentrate on commodity speculation. On the one hand, we need to concentrate on the volatility of commodity prices, which is not only dangerous for those who actually sell them, it's also dangerous, obviously, for those who buy those commodities. But what's important is also to set up a more transparent system when we look at the exploitation of commodities, and there has to be also fair access to commodities. There are a number of fora all over the world where this is debated, Just think of rare earths. That is also a very pertinent case in point. We need to concentrate on this. Growth needs to become predictable, needs to become sustainable, and needs to be shaped in an equitable way. So these are the three most important points on an agenda for growth: currency, trade, and commodities. These are very important issues that need to be debated globally within the framework of the G20. And then each and every region has to look at its own homework and has to live up to its responsibility. That brings me to my home region, to Europe. In the crisis, Europe acted in a coordinated fashion and showed its resolve to tackle the crisis head-on. We initiated stimulus packages. We saved our banking sector. So that demanded quite a lot of effort from us. But now we obviously have to contend with the consequences of this, because we now have a very clear crisis of indebtedness. And let me tell you very clearly, there is no crisis of the euro as such. This is essentially a debt crisis. And in many ways, one could have predicted this crisis from happening, but we now have to overcome it. We have to tackle it and overcome it. 2 years ago, Germany, already in the crisis, as I told you when I came here last, decided to incorporate in its constitution a so-called debt brake. So no matter what political parties will be at the helm of our country, we have to ensure that stability and sound public finances are the order of the day. For Germany, it's very important because next year we will see a very, very important, in the next few years, we will see a very important demographic change. We have an aging society. There will be a very steep rise in the number of old people, and this is why we need to tackle this. We have quite often been criticized for the fact that we've said we need to pursue this course. We have been told, but you need to contribute to growth and concentrate less on consolidation. Let me tell you, over the past 2 years, we've made a very interesting experience. After this enormous slowdown that we've had, last year we had 3.6 growth all of a sudden. And this was expert-driven in the beginning, quite clearly. I've always said there's going to be a new deck of cards on the table in this crisis. China, the Asian countries will be the big winners emerging from this crisis, but we, with our export opportunities, then also were given the chance to participate in this global growth. What's interesting is that in the second half of the last year, and very strongly this year, consumer confidence has returned to Germany, and we have a very strong boost that was given to our domestic consumption. That, to me, is an example that saving, sound fiscal policies, and growth doesn't need to be a contradiction in terms. The confidence, consumer confidence, is a very important boon that allows you to stimulate growth. And so we can say budgetary consolidation remains of prime importance to us and has not done us any damage, quite the contrary. Now, Europe has a problem with high indebtedness, and let me say this very clearly yet again. The euro is our currency and is much more than just a currency. It is, if you like, the embodiment of Europe of today. I quite often said this. Should the euro fail, Europe will fail. Europe is a work of peace. It's a political construction. Europe today, for us, a continent of 500 million, is in fair competition with others. It allows us to pool our resources and to defend our common interests. So we are going to defend the euro. There is no doubt about this. And we need to pursue a policy of stability of the euro. We have to show solidarity. We've shown this solidarity by setting up funds that gave guarantees, that are standing up for those countries that are in difficulties. But we also have to be realistic. It's quite often said, but after all, this is the result of speculation. Yes, but these speculators have these speculations have a root in reality. And this is why we have to do away with the root causes of the speculation. The trust of the markets that these debts, these very high debts, will actually be reduced once growth picks up. that confidence as yet isn't there on the markets. And so it's so important for me, and has always been, that solidarity can only ever be one side of the coin. Solidarity is important. We've shown solidarity. But solidarity needs to go hand in hand with solidity, sound public finances, stability and better competitiveness for the whole of Europe. This crisis, I'm absolutely certain, and I'm saying this on behalf of the whole of the European Union and for the whole of the European Union, it has shown one thing very clearly, and maybe also has changed the way we think. Indebtedness is the biggest danger and the biggest risk for prosperity on this continent. This is why we have to resolutely work against debts, but we also have to resolutely work for enhanced competitiveness. Protection of the euro is linked and needs to be linked with charting a new course. For us, the member states of the European Union, who are joined by the euro as a common currency, this means that we need to now do something that we haven't done to a sufficient extent when the euro was introduced, namely work together in a more coordinated fashion, both politically and economically. This will not happen overnight. Certain matters will be done very quickly, others will take a longer period of time. We'll do this in close concert also with France. We want to put down a marker for the eurozone, not only for reducing our debts, but also for boosting competitiveness and work together more closely, coordinate more closely politically. There will be a number of issues that we shall work on over the next few months. Let me just give you one example. You cannot have a common currency and social security systems that are completely heterogeneous. So in one and the same currency area, the pensionable age and demographic situation should be in some way have some kind of relationship with each other. I think what also has to be done is that we need to free up the possibilities for investments. Red tape has to be cut. We need to concentrate on creating jobs, competitive jobs, that is. And the reality of the day is that we are not in Europe as yet competitive enough, at least not in all of the different areas, and we haven't yet sufficiently secured our competitiveness for the future. I am absolutely convinced that we're able to do this. We have all of the preconditions in place, but we mustn't rest on our current laurels, as it were. And we also need to give a boost to the investments that governments take out as compared to consumption, and we have to show all those in a convincing way that are keeping a close eye on Europe, that we are actually using as our yardstick the best among us and not a sort of median or sort of average, because we don't want to be only similar with each other in Europe. That may well lead us down a slippery slope. That's something I don't want. The yardstick for Europe must be global competitiveness, and this must be the yardstick for all of our future policies, for all of our future political coordination. We feel committed to this goal, and we shall pursue it resolutely. What's part and parcel of this as well is enhancing the Stability and Growth Pact. We know that we need to regain confidence. And please, all of you who have kept a close eye on Europe, just look at what we've done over the past 12 months. We have enhanced the Stability and Growth Pact, and now we have to prove that we abide by the rules. We have allowed it to be orientated more on macroeconomic criteria. This needs to be coupled with a more coordinated political and economic policy. So we need to do our homework, and solidarity and competitiveness, if you like, should be one and the same. Should be two sides of one and the same coin of European competitiveness. And that's why it was so important for me to underline that whoever gets solidarity also needs to receive this solidarity under certain conditions, that people need to do their own homework at home. This is what we have to do. This is our task, and we as Europeans shall give our regional contribution to what we can put on the table as G20. Now, let us reflect a moment on those for whom we do this. In the crisis, when we saved banks, when we initiated fiscal stimulus packages, not only our citizens had the impression that we were actually driven by the economic crisis, that we were constantly lagging behind events, and we should, I think, now take a break and reflect yet again for whom we are doing this. We're doing this in the interest of our citizens the world over. So we as politicians ought to concentrate on shaping our policies in such a way, and that's the great opportunity, the great chance we have after this crisis. We should do this in the interest of our people, using the forces of the market, but in the interest and to the benefit of our people. So we know this is not possible without ours getting closer to each other. I told you this already 2 years ago. I'm not going to underline this yet again, but we also need global responsibility. We need global bodies that tell us quite clearly this is the wrong kind of policy. And then we have to accept that. This body tells us this. That's probably the most difficult learning process, that we allow others to tell us where we're wrong. But shared norms are really what is absolutely essential in order to enable us to meet the challenges of these new realities to the benefit of the people for whom we are responsible. This ought to be our guideline, and it's actually fun to do it. Thank you very much.
Frau Bundeskanzlerin, vielen Dank.
Madam Chancellor, many thanks for that visionary outlining of our way forward. You said at the outset that the currency really establishes a individual country's competitiveness, strength. Within Europe and outside, there are many different levels of competitiveness. How do you see it, the balance, or certainly from the perspective of the euro? Do you think it's overvalued or undervalued?
I don't want to interfere with the evaluation of that. I mean, that's done through market forces. I feel that there is no really harmonious space to these evaluations. There are stronger and weaker partners, so that's why I say we need to steer a very clear course. We're not only a currency union, because in the currency union you don't have the possibility of individual members to actually devalue their currency. So it's so important, not to say indispensable, with at least there's no reasonable alternative to it, to have a more consistent and a more coherent economic policy and competitiveness. Because if we were to drift further apart, the euro and the way it stands and is evaluated would be a theoretical kind of exercise, and it would not reflect the position of the individual countries and their competitiveness where they stand. If we look at the present situation and simply sort of, if you like, take the median and not look at more competitive countries actually setting the pace, if we were doing that, we would allow Europe to slip. And that, I think, is really in the center of a fairly lively debate at this point in time, but I think we'll all live up to this responsibility because we need to remain competitive.
Madam Chancellor, when we speak about Europe, questions of identity also arise. We have not only a rational aspect, but also an emotional aspect. The post-war generation, my generation, had a clear idea, an ideal of what Europe had to be. No more war. And perhaps the other perspective was the social market economy. On listening to you, I could almost say that your vision is a market economy with a human face.
But that's basically what the social market economy was all about. I think it's actually proved the test of time, and particularly in this crisis, we have seen that this interaction of both sides of industry has worked very well. The programs that the government set out were well accepted and helped us. I think that this particular issue is something we must never lose sight of. The origin of Europe was clearly that this was a continent where over centuries nations fought bitter wars against each other, that this ought to be a thing of the past and that peace should reign. And if I look around these days, there are many, many areas in the world these days where we would be very, very pleased if they had already reached that particular stage. But what is important is that it's not as if now in the present situation this were replaced by something, but it's complemented by something else. In the world today, our ideas of shared values, of humanity, of dignity of man, of human rights, we wish to bring these to the fore and wish to fight in this world of today, at the same time also for economic prosperity and economic competitiveness. That's something we can only do if people stand together. So we are on the next level, if you like, but we would lose everything if we would put a question mark over these matters of peace and also of a peaceful coexistence within a society. And you'd be very surprised how quickly then this would give rise again to the old cliches, the old prejudices. Obviously, many countries have to resort to very harsh policies, but this should never result in a situation where we fall back into the sad old patterns of the past. We need to absolutely prevent this.
One final question. You've spoken today before representatives of companies and industry. Over the last 2 years, politicians have taken very difficult decisions, very tough decisions. How do you see the partnership with business and the economy in achieving the goals which have to be achieved, in setting out a path towards those goals? What would you say to the people here in the room?
My wish would be that where regulation is necessary, it is not fought against, or that people think up very creative ideas of how to circumvent it. Maybe people will then say, oh, how naive, I mean, she's a politician, quite rightly so. If she were in business, she wouldn't be able to think this way. But everyone who's interested in long-term prosperity and long-term success also of his or her company should rally around this point. If we want to forge a sustainable growth policy, we should not only try to avoid regulation, we should try to set growth on a continuous and sustainable and solid basis. Secondly, I would hope that those who work in the real economy also try to bring their interests more to the fore, because the real economy, without its own responsibility, actually was affected and very negatively affected by the financial crisis. So I think there ought to be more of a dialogue between financial institutions and the so-called real economy on what is good for each and everyone. The financial business has to be there. It has brought the world forward. It has engendered enormous growth, but it should actually ideally serve the real economy, because without it, it is without a job. Without the existence of the real economy, the financial side will be without a job. But globalization and new norms, if only the real economy were to pursue that, it will not work. But you, I know, have met a lot of meetings here in Davos about this, so I think those who are here have already, I'm preaching probably to the wrong church and preaching to the converted already. You have already, I think, learned the lesson, but each and every one has to be in on this.
So, in light of those words, warm thanks to you, Madam Chancellor, for having come to us today. And later, hopefully, we will have the possibility to discuss further issues with you, particularly the matter of trade. Once again, many, many thanks.